The rain had just begun to slide down the narrow bricks of the alley when a small girl stepped into its dim, flickering light. Leads moved loudly outside, cars rushing, doors slamming, voices blending into the usual morning noise. But inside that alley, the world quieted as if holding its breath. Amélia, 9 years old, thin jacket, soaked shoes, stood with her hands pressed together, not in formality, but in desperate sincerity. The cold bit at her fingers. Her stomach tightened. Her breath trembled in the air. She lowered her head. God, just a little bread. Her whisper barely rose above the drizzle, yet the moment it left her lips, the alley changed. The rain softened. The wind faded. Even the distant traffic seemed to dim, as if sound itself stepped back to listen. A thin glow from the lone street lamp flickered once, twice, casting her shadow long and trembling across the wet concrete. Then she felt it. Not a voice, not a vision, not anything the eye could catch, just warmth. Soft, impossible warmth gathering around her cold hands, spreading gently across her palms like a breath of light. She opened her eyes, startled but unafraid. The world looked the same. Grey bricks, dripping pipes, scattered puddles. Yet something beneath it had shifted, subtle as a heartbeat. Behind her, Claire stood frozen at the entrance of the alley. Exhausted, soaked from work, she watched her daughter with a fear she couldn't name. She wanted to call her, to break the moment, to tell her they needed to go, but she couldn't. Something unseen held her still. Amélia turned her head slightly, eyes distant, calm, filled with a certainty too mature for a child. "He heard," she said softly. The words pierced Claire in a place she kept buried, beneath fatigue, beneath shame, beneath resignation. She felt them landing inside her like a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. No bread appeared. No light split the sky. No voice answered back. Only an invisible stillness remained, deep, subtle, undeniable. And though neither of them could see it, that fragile, trembling prayer, that whispered plea from a hungry child in a forgotten alley, had already begun to move through the city. A nudge here, a stirring there, a feeling someone couldn't explain. By the end of the week, Leeds, busy, practical, modern Leeds, would feel the touch of a moment no one witnessed, but many would swear they sensed. All because a humble girl dared to ask for bread. Grey clouds hung low over Leeds, pressed so close to the rooftops it seemed they were resting on the chimneys. The city stretched awake with the same tired movements as always. Buses sighing at corners, doors opening, kettles boiling, alarms being silenced with lazy hands. Nothing in the sky announced change. Nothing in the streets suggested that anything unseen had stirred in the dark. In the small apartment above the alley, the cold got there first. It slipped in through the thin window frames, crept along the floorboards, and settled on the soles of bare feet. Claire stood in the kitchen, her shoulders rounded, her uniform from the night before still clinging to her skin with the faint smell of cleaning products. She held the cupboard door half open, staring into it as if a different answer might appear if she looked long enough. One egg, a nearly empty box of cereal, tea bags, no bread. The word itself seemed heavy in her mind. Bread, simple, ordinary, the kind of thing people grabbed without thinking. For her it was now a decision, a calculation, a weight. She closed the cupboard quietly, as if not to wake the hunger sitting inside it. From the living room she heard the faint rustle of a blanket. Amélia. The girl shifted, turning over on the small sofa that had become her bed. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, "Mom?" The voice was soft, not yet shaped by the day's worries. "I'm here," Claire answered, forcing a lighter tone. "You can get up, love. We're running a bit late." It wasn't true, but moving quickly felt easier than thinking. Amélia sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her hair was messy, falling over her face in loose strands. She blinked toward the window, drawn to it as if something waited on the other side. The glass was fogged again with the moisture of their breath and the chill of the morning. She slid off the sofa and padded toward it, standing on the tips of her toes to look out over the alley. The same bricks, the same street lamp, now off, the same cracked pavement, but to her it didn't feel the same. She placed her hand on the cold glass, watching the outline of her small fingers appear in the condensation. Last night's warmth had faded, yet its memory lingered in her skin. There was no glow now, no sensation, but there was a quiet knowing inside her, still and steady, like a word held in the chest instead of on the tongue. Claire watched her from the kitchen doorway. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly. "We need to get you ready." Amelia dropped her hand and turned. There was no drama in her expression, no forced smile, just a calmness Claire didn't understand. "Okay," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm ready." They dressed without many words. Amelia pulled on the same worn jeans, the same faded jumper with a small stitched star near the collar, the same too-thin coat whose zipper stuck halfway up. Claire helped tug it past the snag, then brushed the girl's hair into a loose ponytail. "Did you sleep well?" Claire asked, more to fill the air than to know. "Yes," Amelia answered. Then, after a pause, he was still listening. Claire's hands froze mid-motion. She tried to steady her voice. "Who?" Amelia blinked, as if surprised the answer wasn't obvious. "God." The name settled between them with quiet weight. Claire swallowed. "We talked about this, love," she murmured, trying to sound gentle, not afraid. "Sometimes people say things to feel better. It doesn't mean—" "I know," the girl said softly, cutting her off with a kindness rare in children. "But he heard. It wasn't just in my head." The certainty in those words made something inside Claire flinch. A part of her wanted to correct it, anchor her daughter to what she called reality, to protect her from the disappointment that so often followed hope. Another part of her, small and stubborn and buried beneath years of exhaustion, remembered standing in a church as a child, feeling something similar. She pushed that memory away. "We should go," she said instead. They stepped out into the corridor, the air colder than inside the flat. The stairwell smelled of damp stone and cleaning chemicals. Their footsteps echoed as they descended, each step a soft thud that blended into the muted soundtrack of the building. When they reached the ground floor and stepped out into the alley, the city greeted them with a chilly, indifferent breeze. The alley looked ordinary. The bricks were still stained with old rain. The puddles were still shallow mirrors for a colorless sky. The metal fire escape clung to the side of the building like a skeletal staircase leading nowhere. But as they walked through it, Amelia slowed. Her eyes moved along the walls, returning to the exact spot where she had stood the night before. The space held no visible mark, no sign that anything sacred had touched it, and yet she felt as though the air there remembered her voice. She reached out, gently touching the cold brick with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. Claire stopped a few steps ahead and turned, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing, love?" "Just saying thank you," Amelia replied, as if it were the simplest, most natural explanation. "For what?" Claire asked. There was no accusation in her tone, just a genuine confusion, tinged with a fear she couldn't quite name. "For listening," the girl murmured. Claire opened her mouth, searching for a response. She found none that didn't sound harsh or dismissive, and in that uncertainty, she said nothing. She simply watched her daughter, feeling like she was standing outside a conversation happening in a language she once understood and now could barely remember. They left the alley and joined the slow-moving stream of people heading toward the main road. Children in uniforms, adults clutching coffee cups, a cyclist weaving carefully between puddles. Life went on, unchanged on the surface. Yet a few streets away, a man woke earlier than usual without knowing why. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling a restlessness under his ribs. He wasn't religious. He rarely thought of anything beyond his own tasks, his job at the bakery, the routine of kneading, shaping, timing. But on that morning something nudged him with a strange clarity. Take one more loaf. The thought came quietly, almost like a suggestion, yet it lingered with such persistence that he sighed, rolled out of bed, and obeyed without understanding. Back on the street, Claire and Amelia waited at the bus stop. The shelter was half fogged from the breath of those gathered inside it. A faded advertisement flickered behind a glass panel. Cars passed in waves of sound. Claire stood with her hands deep in her coat pockets, teeth pressed into the inside of her cheek. She could feel the dull ache of fatigue anchoring her limbs, the number of hours she had worked, the weight of unpaid bills, the knowledge of what waited in the cupboard when they returned home. Beside her, Amelia watched people instead of traffic. A man frowning into his phone, a mother adjusting her child's scarf, a teenager tapping her foot to music only she could hear. The world looked so full of movement and objects and noise, and yet under it she sensed something else. A quiet pulse, a gentle stirring. Her attention dropped to the bench. At one end of it someone had left a single paper bag, brown, folded neatly at the top, unmarked, unclaimed. Amelia stepped closer. "Mum," she said softly, pointing. Claire followed her gaze, and her body tensed instantly. Suspicion rose before curiosity. "Don't touch that," she said quickly. "It's not ours." The elderly woman standing nearby lifted her eyes, following the direction of their stare. Her hands tightened around her trolley handle. "That's been there since I arrived," she murmured. 20 minutes at least. No one's looked at it. No one's claimed it." "It could be rubbish," Claire muttered. "It doesn't look like rubbish," the woman replied gently. Amelia moved slowly, as if drawn by something beyond the simple sight of a paper bag. The closer she got, the more she felt it, a subtle warmth in the air, not enough to feel on her skin, but enough to soften the heaviness in her chest. She reached out and laid her hand on the bag. It was warm, not hot, not steaming, just fresh, as if whatever was inside had been placed there not long ago by careful, deliberate hands. Claire's voice shook. "Amelia, I said don't." The girl looked back at her mother with eyes that held no fear, only quiet assurance. "Mom," she whispered, "this is ours." "How do you know that?" Claire asked, her heart racing, her voice nearly cracking. Amelia glanced briefly around. No one was watching. No one seemed interested. People stood in their own bubbles of worry and routine, untouched by the small scene unfolding beside them. "I asked," she said simply, "and he heard." She slowly unfolded the top of the bag. The smell rose first. Warm, gentle, familiar. Fresh bread. Not fancy, not expensive. Just simple, crusty, still soft bread. For a moment Claire forgot how to breathe. Her eyes stung, her throat closed. The damp air around them blurred as tears formed and refused to fall. The elderly woman stepped closer, her gaze soft. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "kindness doesn't leave a note." Claire's mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe someone from the bakery had dropped it. Maybe it was a promotion. Maybe. Logic clawed at her, desperate to erase the shape of a miracle from the scene. But logic could not explain the timing, could not explain the warmth, could not explain the way her daughter's shoulders relaxed, as if something invisible had just confirmed what she already knew. Around them the city went on. A bus pulled up, doors hissed open, people moved forward, and somewhere, Unnoticed by everyone else, the first quiet ripple had begun. The bus arrived with a long, mechanical sigh, releasing a wave of warm air from its doors. Passengers stepped forward, pushing slightly against one another, eager to secure seats before the morning rush filled every inch of space. The world continued its movement, as though nothing unusual had happened at the bench, as though a paper bag filled with fresh bread could ever be just a coincidence. Claire remained frozen. Her breath felt caught between her ribs, neither fully entering nor leaving. Her eyes stayed fixed on the loaf in her daughter's hands, golden crust, warm surface, a softness beneath the paper that made her chest tighten with a strange mixture of fear and awe. "Mom," Amelia said quietly, "we have to get on." Claire blinked. The noise of the city suddenly flooded back. Engines rumbling, conversations overlapping, the bus driver calling out impatiently, "Are you getting in or not?" The world demanded an answer. Claire nodded shakily. Yes, we're getting in." They climbed onto the bus, still holding the bread as though it might dissolve into mist if they loosened their grip. They took a seat near the back, and Amelia placed the warm loaf on her lap with care, as if placing it on an altar. The city slipped past the windows, brick houses, graffiti-stained underpasses, rows of shops opening their metal shutters, the grey morning settling across the streets like a quiet sigh. But inside the bus, Claire's world felt strange, suspended, as though this morning belonged to a different timeline. She watched her daughter, the way Amelia stroked the paper bag with her thumb, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she breathed, slow and steady, as if peace itself sat beside her. "Sweetheart," Claire whispered, leaning in. You can't think this means something." Amelia looked up. Her eyes weren't hopeful in the childish way Claire feared. They were calm, certain, grounded in something deeper. "It does mean something," she said simply. "He heard me." Claire swallowed hard, turning her face toward the window as tears secretly pooled at the corners of her eyes. She hated crying in public, hated the vulnerability it exposed. But something inside her trembled, the part of her that had worked double shifts for months, the part that rationed meals, the part that carried guilt like a constant weight. She had asked for nothing. Her daughter had asked for everything, and someone had answered. She pressed her fingers to her lips to stop the trembling. Outside the bus, life continued undisturbed. But somewhere in Leeds, small things were beginning to move. 3 streets away, the bakery worker who had woken earlier than usual kept glancing at the tray he had prepared. That extra loaf, the one he felt strangely compelled to make, now sat cooling on the counter. He stared at it, confused. He didn't remember shaping it, didn't remember placing it in the oven, didn't remember timing it. It was as if his hands had acted without his awareness. When the manager arrived, the worker gestured toward the loaf. "Do you want me to put that out front?" The manager frowned. "What loaf?" "That one." The manager approached, touched the crust and blinked. "This was just baked?" "Yeah," the worker said, still uncertain. "I must have done it and forgotten." The manager shook his head. "You forget to mark a loaf?" He laughed lightly. "Never thought I'd see the day." The worker forced a smile, but deep down something unsettled him. He wrapped the loaf automatically, tied the string around it, and set it aside. Minutes later, a woman walked in, an elderly woman with gentle eyes and a slight tremble in her hands. She ordered her usual, a small pastry and a cup of tea. As she reached for her purse, the worker felt the same quiet nudge he had felt that morning. "Give it to her." He furrowed his brow. "Ma'am, would you like a loaf of bread? Fresh? On the house?" She paused, surprised. "On the house? Why?" He shook his head. "I don't know, just feels right today." She accepted with a warm smile, but her eyes softened with something unspoken, a memory of a prayer made long ago, perhaps, or a gratitude she didn't voice. The bread she received wouldn't stay with her. She would give it away before the afternoon, to someone she felt strangely drawn to help. A thread had been woven, invisible, delicate, but real. Back on the bus, Claire tried to calm her thoughts. She watched her daughter as the vehicle turned another corner, the loaf still resting on her lap. "Amelia," she whispered, "you can't believe that God sends bread like this. That isn't how things work." Amelia looked at her mother with a tenderness far beyond her age. "It is when a child asks," she said softly. "Adults forget. But children still know how to be heard." Claire felt her breath catch. For a moment she saw something old in her daughter's eyes, something ancient, gentle, luminous. Not a glow, not a vision, but a depth she couldn't explain. "Where did you even learn to say things like that?" Claire asked, her voice breaking. Amelia shrugged lightly. "I didn't learn. I just felt it." They rode in silence after that. The bus reached its next stop. People got on and off, but one man, seated near the front, kept glancing toward the girl with the bread. He didn't know why his attention kept drifting to her. He wasn't usually observant. He didn't care about strangers. But something about the scene, the small hands holding the paper bag, the calm expression, the warmth radiating from the loaf, struck him. He couldn't explain it. He didn't try. At the next stop, he stood, walked to the driver, and said quietly, "I'll pay for her fare." He nodded toward Amelia. "And her mum." The driver blinked. "Why?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Feels right today." And just like that, the thread stretched again. At school, teachers noticed Amelia's unusual calmness. She wasn't distracted or restless. She wasn't withdrawn. She simply moved with a softness they weren't used to seeing, as if walking in a quiet conversation with something unseen. During lunchtime, while other children talked loudly, traded snacks, and fought over seats, Amelia placed her leftover piece of bread next to a girl who sat alone. The girl looked up, confused. "Why?" Amelia smiled gently. "Because I have enough for today." The girl didn't know it yet, but she would go home after school and tell her mother about the gesture. Her mother would post the story online without mentioning names. A simple, anonymous account of a child sharing bread. By the next morning, that post would reach hundreds. By the end of the week, thousands. And all of it would trace back unknowingly to the prayer in the alley. While Amelia was at school, Claire walked to her second job. The bread sat safely wrapped in her bag. She touched it often, as if confirming it was still real. Each time her fingers brushed the warm crust, her heart tightened. She didn't believe in miracles. She had stopped believing years ago. Somewhere between the unpaid bills, the long shifts, the cold nights, and the loss of everything she once hoped for. But this was different. She paused at a crosswalk, watching traffic surge by. People hurried, people shouted, people checked phones. The world looked the same. But inside her chest, something had softened, a thread pulling gently. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Maybe it was the first small sign that the city, tired, busy, in different leads, had begun to shift in ways no one could measure. All because a hungry child whispered a prayer, and someone listened. It wasn't the temperature, still cold around the edges, still drafts slipping through the thin window frames. It wasn't the light, still weak, still filtered through the alley, still fighting its way across the worn floor. No, the difference was quieter, almost invisible. It was in the way Claire turned the key, in the way Amelia stepped over the threshold, in the way neither of them felt completely alone. They entered carrying nothing special in the eyes of the world. No bags of groceries, no new furniture, no sudden money. Just one simple loaf of bread wrapped in paper, tucked carefully under Claire's arm like something sacred. She closed the door behind them and leaned her back against it for a moment, letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Amelia walked straight to the small wooden table in the corner of the kitchen. It wobbled slightly when she touched it. She laid the loaf in the center with a reverence that made the room itself feel like it had straightened its spine. No one spoke. The sound of the city filtered in faintly from outside, distant horns, muffled voices, the low rumble of a bus passing. It all felt far away now, as if the walls had thickened around this small space, creating a quiet pocket carved out of all the noise. Claire approached the table slowly. Up close, the bread looked so ordinary. It wasn't glowing. It didn't hum. It wasn't perfect. The crust was slightly uneven, one side a little darker. But ordinary things didn't usually appear on bus stop benches at just the right moment. Ordinary things didn't fit so exactly inside a whispered prayer. She reached out and ran her thumb along the crust. Warm, still soft beneath the shell, real. Amelia watched her, standing on the other side of the table, fingers laced together. "You should cut it, Mom," she said quietly. Claire swallowed. "We should save it," she replied. "Make it last. Maybe have it tomorrow too." Amelia shook her head, gently but firmly. "He gave it for today." The way she said it made Claire's chest tighten. There was no doubt in her tone, no anxiety, just a calm that came from somewhere deeper than simple optimism. "Please," the girl added softly, "just today. Let's not be afraid of tomorrow yet." The words pierced deeper than they had any right to. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the sting behind them. Then she reached for the drawer, pulled out a knife and set it against the crust. As the blade pressed down, the crackle of breaking bread filled the silence. It was a small sound, but it carried weight, like something being opened in more than one place at once. Steam escaped slowly, unfurling into the cool air like a soft, invisible ribbon. The smell hit them, warm, familiar, comforting in a way that made the hunger in their bodies suddenly very loud. Claire hadn't realized just how empty she felt until that scent reached her. It wasn't just her stomach that responded. It was something in her spirit, something tired and worn, that had forgotten what it felt like to be gently cared for. She cut 2 thick slices and placed one on a plate in front of Amelia, the other on her own. The girl didn't start eating immediately. She placed her hands beside the plate, palms resting on the worn surface of the table, her eyes lowered. Not in theatrics, not to be seen, just naturally. "Thank you," she whispered. Claire's throat closed. She wasn't sure who the words were for anymore. For the stranger who left the bag, for the old woman at the bus stop who had encouraged them, for the man who paid their fare, for an unseen listener in a narrow alley. Maybe for all of them, maybe for one behind them all. She stared at her slice of bread, fighting the instinct to analyze, to rationalize, to tear the experience apart until nothing meaningful remained. Then for the first time in a long time, she let herself do something simple instead. She bowed her head just the slightest bit and breathed the same words, barely audible. "Thank you." They ate in silence, not rushed, not panicked, not like people scared of running out. Each bite filled more than their bodies. It soothed, it settled. It felt like something was being gently stitched back together inside them. Halfway through her slice, Amelia paused. "What is it?" Claire asked. The girl tilted her head, as if listening. "Someone else is sharing bread right now," she murmured. Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Amelia admitted, her brow softening. "I just Feel it. Somewhere in the city, someone is doing something kind with bread, and they don't even know why. A shiver crawled up Claire's spine. At that exact moment, in another part of Leeds, the elderly woman from the bus stop stood in her small living room. She held a loaf of bread, given to her earlier that day at the bakery for free, for no clear reason. She stared at it for a long moment, then sighed. Her neighbour upstairs had been struggling. She'd heard the arguments, the crying, the muffled apologies. Without fully understanding what pushed her, she wrapped part of the loaf in a cloth and climbed the stairs. Her hand trembled slightly as she knocked. When the door opened, she held out the wrapped bread and simply said, "I thought you might need this today." The young woman at the door stared, shocked. "Why would you?" "I don't know," the elderly woman replied truthfully. "It just felt right." Bread passed from one hand to another. The thread stretched again. Back in the small apartment above the alley, Amelia smiled as if hearing a distant song. Claire watched her daughter, uneasy and fascinated all at once. "How do you know these things?" she whispered. "I don't know," the girl replied with honesty. "I just feel them here." She gently tapped her chest. "Like someone is letting me hear the quiet parts of the city." The phrase lingered between them, the quiet parts of the city. Claire sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She looked at the remaining half of the loaf on the table. They could have finished all of it. Hunger would have gladly accepted that. But somehow, eating everything now felt wrong, wasteful, even if nothing would be thrown away. Without fully knowing why, she wrapped the leftover portion in a clean piece of cloth. "What are you doing?" Amelia asked. Claire paused, surprised by her own answer. "I'm keeping this for someone else." Amelia's eyes softened, brightening in a way that didn't come from the light in the room. "For who?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Claire admitted. "But when I see them, I think I'll know." She didn't realize until she said it that she meant every word. Something had shifted inside her that she could no longer deny. It wasn't a full return to faith. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic conversion. It was smaller, simpler, like a door left slightly open instead of locked. That night, after washing the dishes and tidying the small kitchen, Claire sat on the edge of the sofa while Amelia got ready for bed. The girl came back with a worn notebook in her hands. "What's that?" Claire asked. "My notebook," Amelia replied. "I want to write it down." "Write what down?" "Today." She opened to a blank page and with a blue pen wrote slowly at the top, "The day God sent bread." Claire watched, her heart tightening. "People will say it was just a stranger," she murmured, more to herself than to her daughter. Amelia nodded, not arguing. "Maybe it was," she said, "but strangers listen to someone too, even when they don't know it." She continued writing, small letters pressed carefully into the page. Later that night, a different kind of writing took place somewhere else in the city. The girl at school, who had sat alone with her tray half empty, posted a short message online. No names, no faces, just a story. "A little girl shared her bread with me today. She said she had enough for today and that someone had listened to her. I don't know what she meant, but I cried in the bathroom afterwards. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I felt seen. Whoever you are, thank you." By midnight, the post had been shared dozens of times. The next day, hundreds. It would not become instantly famous. It would not explode overnight. But it would grow, slowly, steadily, like light spreading under a door. Strangers would read it on buses, in break rooms, in quiet moments before sleep. Some would simply smile. Some would scroll past. But a few, just a few, would feel something stir. A memory, a small ache, a question they thought they had buried. And they would wonder, if only for a moment, what if the world is gentler than I thought? Back in the alley, the rain finally stopped. The wet bricks cooled in the night air. The street lamp flickered once more, then settled into a soft, steady glow. The alley looked empty. No bread, no people, no movement. But it remembered. It remembered the whispered prayer of a child, and the warmth that had gathered in her hands. And the city, though it did not know it yet, was already changing. The next morning, Leeds woke under a pale, colourless sky, the kind that made the entire city feel slightly suspended between night and day. The buses moved earlier than usual, their engines echoing down narrow streets. Shopkeepers murmured tired greetings as they unlocked doors. A thin mist lingered near the ground, too heavy to be fog, too light to be rain, giving everything a blurred, softened edge. In the small apartment above the alley, Claire stood at the counter, staring at the remaining half of the loaf wrapped in cloth. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's expression from the day before. Calm, certain, almost illuminated by something she couldn't name. She reached out, touching the cloth gently. The bread had cooled overnight, but when her fingers pressed into it, it still felt alive, not warm, not glowing, just present in a way simple objects usually weren't. Behind her, Amelia appeared quietly, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Her hair was tousled, her socks mismatched, her face soft with sleep. But the moment she saw the bread, she smiled, as if greeting something familiar. "It didn't leave," she whispered. Claire turned, frowning. "Bread doesn't leave, sweetheart." Amelia shook her head. "Not the bread. The feeling." Claire opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She didn't have the courage to tell her daughter the truth, that the feeling terrified her, that she didn't understand it, that she feared believing in something again only to watch it break. Instead, she picked up the cloth-wrapped loaf and hesitated. "We can't eat it all today," she said. "We need to make it stretch." Amelia stepped closer, her voice soft and sure. "We'll have what we need." The simplicity of the words unsettled Claire. She wanted to protect her daughter from disappointment, but how do you protect a child who isn't afraid? She packed 2 small slices for school, and as they walked out of the apartment, something felt different again. The air in the alley seemed warmer than the rest of the street. A faint scent of bread lingered, impossible, subtle, almost like a memory. As they walked toward the bus stop, Claire noticed people behaving strangely, in ways too small to seem meaningful, yet too consistent to ignore. A man paused at the corner where a homeless woman sat. Claire had seen him pass her every morning without a glance, always engrossed in his phone. Today, he stopped. He knelt. He asked her name. And then, without hesitating, he handed her the entire contents of the bakery bag he carried. He didn't look confused. He didn't look proud. He simply acted, as though something deep inside him nudged him forward. A few steps later, they passed a cafe. A woman at the door stood holding a tray of pastries, offering them to anyone who walked by. She wore an apron, her hair pulled into a bun, her cheeks flushed from the morning rush. Claire had never seen her do this before, not in all the years she walked this route. "What's going on?" Claire murmured. The woman shrugged, smiling softly. "Woke up today and felt like giving things away. Don't know why. Feels right." That phrase again. Feels right, like an echo, like a thread pulling through the city, connecting people who didn't know they were part of something larger. Amelia watched silently, her face serene. "You feel it too, don't you?" Claire whispered. The girl nodded. "Something is listening, and people are hearing it." At school, the ripple grew. The story of the bread from yesterday had reached a few teachers, not with names, not with details, but through murmurs in the staff room. A child sharing her lunch, a quiet generosity. A moment that made one of the teachers cry alone in the hallway, overwhelmed by a kindness she hadn't expected in months. No one knew the girl was Amelia, not yet. But people felt the shift. At lunchtime, Amelia sat alone for only a moment. Then the girl she had shared with the day before approached cautiously, holding 2 cookies in her hands. "These are for you," she said. Amelia smiled, shaking her head gently. "Share them with someone who needs it." The girl frowned. "But I want to thank you." "You can," Amelia replied, "just not with cookies." She pointed toward a boy at the end of the table eating nothing but a plain apple. "Give one to him," she said softly. The girl hesitated. Then she walked toward the boy and placed a cookie beside him. He stared at it, wide-eyed, as though he had forgotten what it felt like to be offered something without reason. The cafeteria didn't change shape. The noise didn't quiet. The lights didn't flicker. And yet a new current ran through the room, soft, subtle, like a warm draft passing under a closed door. One teacher noticed. She couldn't explain why, but watching the exchange made her heart ache in a way that felt strangely hopeful. Later, she would tell another teacher, and that teacher would go home and hug her teenage son a little tighter than usual. The city continued shifting, quietly. After school, Claire returned to her second job cleaning office buildings. She tried to focus on the familiar motions, emptying bins, wiping surfaces, sweeping corners, but thoughts of the bread wouldn't leave her. During her break, she opened her phone and scrolled through social media. A post caught her eye, a blurry photo of a partially eaten piece of bread, a caption beneath it, "A little girl shared her lunch with me today. She said, 'I have enough for today.'" I don't know why, but I can't stop thinking about it. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments. People sharing their own small stories of unexpected kindness that morning. It wasn't viral, not yet, but it was spreading, quietly, gently, like light. Claire locked her phone and sat back, pressing a hand to her chest. She felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Warmth, hope, a tiny spark of belief, but with the warmth came fear. "Please," she whispered to no one, "don't let this be taken from us." Meanwhile, across the city, the bakery worker stood staring at his hands again. He had finished his shift early, but instead of going home, he lingered near the counter, watching customers come and go. He didn't understand why he felt restless, why his chest felt tight, why he kept thinking about that extra loaf from the day before. He spoke quietly to his manager. "Can we make extra today? Just a few?" The manager raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you the one pushing to give things away?" "I don't know," he said helplessly. "It just feels right." That phrase again. He didn't know he was part of something bigger. None of them knew, but the ripple kept growing. As evening approached, Claire picked up Amelia from school. They walked home through the alley as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that stretched across the damp pavement. Amelia stopped halfway through and placed her hand on the cold brick wall again. "What are you doing?" Claire whispered. The girl closed her eyes. "Someone else is praying," she murmured. "Not here, somewhere far. But someone is praying the same thing." Claire's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "It's like the city is breathing," Amelia said. "And every kindness makes it breathe deeper." The alley fell silent, not empty, alive. Claire knelt beside her daughter, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, what's happening to you?" Amelia opened her eyes slowly. There was no fear in them, only clarity. "Nothing is happening to me," she whispered. "Something is happening to everyone else." Claire felt chills run down her spine. The city was listening, people were stirring, hearts were softening. And somewhere in the center of all of it, a child's whispered prayer still echoed, weaving unseen threads between strangers. Leeds didn't know it yet, but it was being gently, quietly transformed, one loaf at a time, one act at a time, one soul at a time. The story had stopped belonging to a single girl. It now belonged to the city. Night fell over Leeds like a slow curtain of charcoal grey. Street lamps flickered to life one by one, their halos soft and trembling in the mist. Windows glowed faintly across rows of terraced houses. Cars rolled by with headlights smearing into thin, white ribbons against the wet pavement. The city looked ordinary, almost sleepy, but it did not feel ordinary. Something moved beneath the surface, unseen, gentle, steady. It pulsed through the streets like a quiet heartbeat. People walked a little slower. Eyes lifted more often. Conversations ended with softer tones. And everywhere, in places where hunger or loneliness or despair used to hide unnoticed, small gestures appeared like lights being switched on in the dark. And all of it was building toward this night. In the apartment above the alley, Amelia sat by the window, legs tucked beneath her, wrapped in a blanket that had lost some of its warmth, but not its comfort. She wasn't drawing. She wasn't reading. She wasn't asleep. She was listening, not with her ears, with something deeper. Soft echoes brushed at her awareness, tiny, fragile, distant, like heartbeats from across the city. A door closing, a sigh, a whisper, a prayer, a quiet act of kindness blooming somewhere far away. She looked peaceful, almost illuminated by the faint light from the street lamp outside. Claire watched her from the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she washed the last dish from dinner. The bread had fed them again, as though half a loaf had stretched into more than logic allowed. She didn't want to think about that too much, not yet, but she couldn't deny it. 2 slices the night before, 2 for breakfast, 2 more for dinner, and there was still some left. She lifted the damp plate, exhaling shakily. "How are you feeling, love?" she asked softly. Amelia turned, eyes glowing with that strange, quiet certainty that both comforted and frightened Claire. "Like something is coming," the girl whispered. Claire set the plate down too quickly. It clattered against the counter. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice tight. Amelia hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist in the vocabulary of most children. "People are praying tonight," she said. "More than yesterday, more than usual. And someone is listening." Claire felt a chill crawl across her skin. She dried her hands quickly and walked to her daughter, kneeling beside her. "You're scaring me," she admitted, her voice breaking in a way she rarely allowed. "Please, tell me what's happening to you." Amelia looked at her mother with a tenderness far older than her 9 years. "Nothing is happening to me," she said softly. "It's happening to them. I'm just hearing the echoes." Claire swallowed, her breath trembling. "Echoes of what?" "Hope." Across the city, in a small flat where the electricity had been shut off earlier that afternoon, a single candle flickered. A young mother sat on the floor, her baby asleep in her arms, her stomach empty. She hadn't eaten since the previous morning. She whispered into the warm glow, "Please, just help me feed her tomorrow, just tomorrow." Her voice cracked, and the moment the words left her lips, the candle flame wavered, not from a draught, but as if acknowledging something. She shivered. A soft knock sounded at her door. She froze. The knock came again, gentle, not urgent, not threatening, but hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. She stood, heart pounding, careful not to wake her baby. She opened the door just a few inches, then gasped. On the floor sat a bag with a loaf of bread, a small tin of soup, and a note that read only, "For today." She looked up and down the hallway. No one. Only silence. She lifted the bag with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom. And in a small alley across the city, a 9-year-old girl smiled without knowing why. Meanwhile, in another part of Leeds, the bakery worker from earlier sat on his sofa staring at his hands again. He felt restless, uneasy, pulled. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his coat, and walked out into the cold. He didn't know where he was going. His feet chose for him. He stopped in front of a house he had never noticed before, lights off, curtains drawn, a faint shadow of someone sitting alone inside. His chest tightened. He reached into the bakery bag in his hand. He had taken an extra loaf home, without understanding why, and placed it gently on the doorstep. He knocked, once, softly. Then he walked away before anyone opened the door. Behind him, a woman cracked the door open with tired eyes. When she saw the bread, she covered her mouth with her hand and began to cry. The ripple moved again. A taxi driver pulling into his driveway suddenly felt the urge to give the sandwich he hadn't eaten to the homeless man he passed every night. A teenager who spent most evenings isolating in her room found herself walking to the kitchen and preparing 2 peanut butter sandwiches for her younger brother, who always pretended he wasn't hungry. An elderly man who rarely left his home put on his coat, crossed the street for the first time in weeks, and left half of his groceries on the doorstep of the struggling family next door. In every corner of the city, bread appeared in strange places: on a bus seat, on a bench near the river, on a stairwell in a crowded building, at the entrance of a shelter, in front of a closed church. No one left notes. No one claimed credit. No one explained. People just said the same thing. It felt right. It felt like someone told me. I don't know why, I just did. And all the while, in the apartment above the alley, Amelia breathed slowly, eyes half closed, listening to each small act of kindness, like distant bells ringing through the night. Claire watched her daughter and whispered, "Who are you becoming?" Amelia didn't answer. She was listening too closely. Near midnight, a new sound broke the quiet, a soft knock at their own door. Claire froze. No one visited them. No one knocked this late. No one knew anything. Her heart pounded as she approached the door. She rested her hand on the knob and hesitated, fear and curiosity wrestling inside her. Then she opened it just a few inches. No one stood there. Only the cold hallway, the hum of a distant radiator, the flicker of lights. She lowered her gaze. On the floor sat another paper bag, fresh, warm, folded neatly. Her breath caught. She picked it up with trembling hands, then shut the door quickly, leaning against it as if the world outside might rush in. "Mom?" Amelia asked softly from across the room. Claire held the bag tightly, her voice shaking. "Someone brought us more bread." Amelia rose from the windowsill, her small feet silent against the floor. She touched her mother's hand gently. "Not someone," she whispered. "Many." The room felt full then, not with people, not with sound, but with presence. Soft, warm, unexplainable presence. Claire felt tears filling her eyes. "How is this happening?" she whispered. Amelia looked up with calm, clear certainty. When one person listens, others learn to hear too. Claire's tears fell because she knew, finally, that the city was waking. Not by force, not by miracle in the loud sense, but through dozens of quiet knockings in the night. And it had all started with a prayer whispered in the rain. Leeds slept, but kindness didn't. It moved through the streets like breath, and the night, gentle, watchful, sacred, held the city in its unseen hands. Dawn arrived softly, as if afraid to disturb what the night had created. A faint blush of light touched the rooftops of Leeds, slow and delicate, sliding over chimneys, melting into the mist that hung low across the streets. The world looked the same from the outside. Grey clouds, early traffic, tired commuters. But beneath the familiar surface, something unmistakable had changed. People didn't know how to describe it. They didn't have the language for it, but they felt it. A tenderness, a pause, a sense that the city had woken with a breath it hadn't taken in years. In the apartment above the alley, Claire opened her eyes before the alarm sounded. She lay still for a moment, listening, not to the noise of the building, but to the strange stillness inside her own chest. Then she sat up, remembering. The knock, the second loaf, the warmth of her daughter's hand in the dark. She rose slowly and walked to the small table. The latest loaf lay wrapped in paper, untouched, waiting. She brushed her fingers along it. It was warm again, impossibly warm, as though it had been freshly baked moments ago. Amelia appeared in the doorway, hair messy, face soft with sleep. She smiled the moment she saw the bread. "He wasn't done," she said gently. Claire exhaled, her voice barely audible. "I don't understand how this is real." Amelia stepped close and leaned her head against her mother's arm. "You don't have to understand it," she whispered. "You just have to let it happen." Claire kissed the top of her daughter's head slowly, as if touching something fragile and holy. When they stepped outside, the alley greeted them with an unexpected sight. A man stood near the entrance, someone Claire had never seen before. Older, his coat worn, his hands tucked into his pockets. He wasn't doing anything, not waiting for anyone, not pacing, just standing, as though listening to something unseen. When Claire and Amelia passed him, he looked up and nodded politely. "Good morning," he said. His voice wasn't remarkable, but the gentleness in it made Claire's heart jump. She nodded back, uncertain. Then something odd happened. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped bundle. "Do you know anyone who might need this?" he asked quietly. "I woke up today and felt I should give it to someone." Inside the cloth lay 2 small rolls, warm. Claire stared, stunned. Before she could speak, Amelia stepped forward and smiled. "We'll find someone," she said. The man's eyes softened with relief. "Thank you," he whispered and walked away. Claire felt the world tilt slightly. The ripple was no longer small. It was everywhere. At the bus stop, the air buzzed with conversations. Not loud, not chaotic, but urgent in a soft way, as if everyone carried a story that felt too strange to keep quiet. A woman said she'd found bread on her doorstep. A teenager said she'd seen 2 strangers hugging outside a bakery, crying, thanking each other for nothing specific. A bus driver said half his passengers had given away food that morning. An old man said he'd followed a sudden urge to give a croissant to the clerk at the shop, who broke down in tears without explaining why. People were not connecting the events. They were simply sharing them. Until a young girl, standing near Claire, spoke quietly to her mother. "Mom, I think the city is being kind." The sentence made everyone nearby pause. No one laughed. No one corrected her. The idea didn't feel childish. It felt true. Claire swallowed hard. Amelia looked ahead, listening again. She felt the echoes stronger today, many of them overlapping like dozens of threads pulling through one single point. At school, the shift was unmistakable. Teachers who normally hurried past one another stopped to talk. Students shared food without being asked. A boy who spent most days teasing others walked up to a shy classmate and quietly placed a muffin on his desk without a word. No one knew why. People weren't acting out of charity. They were acting out of calling. During recess, Amelia stood near a small tree in the courtyard, watching the other children. The wind brushed her hair. She closed her eyes. Something was coming closer. Something big, not dangerous, not loud, just approaching. A teacher named Mrs. Collins walked toward her, brow creased with concern. "Amelia," she said gently, "are you feeling all right?" The girl opened her eyes. "Yes," she answered. Then she added softly, "But are you?" The question struck the teacher unexpectedly. She blinked, stunned. Tears filled her eyes before she understood why. "No," she whispered, "I'm not." Amelia touched her hand. "You will be. Mrs. Collins broke into silent sobs, quiet ones, the kind released only when something long-held finally loosens. She squeezed the girl's hand, then walked away slowly, wiping tears before anyone noticed. Amelia returned to watching the children play. She didn't feel proud or powerful or special. She simply felt connected. Across Leeds, bread continued to appear in unlikely places. A bakery worker prepared extra loaves without being asked. A cafe owner put a basket of free pastries outside her door. A grocery cashier quietly paid for the milk of a struggling mother. A stranger handed his sandwich to a man crying on a bench. A teenager dropped a wrapped roll into the lap of a man sleeping on the sidewalk. And still, no one understood why they were doing it. They only felt that they must. A pull, an urge, a nudge, a whisper. Not a voice, not words, just direction. Claire felt it too. On her lunch break, she walked past a bus shelter and noticed a teenager sitting alone, crying into her sleeve. Something inside Claire shifted. Without thinking, she reached into her bag. She pulled out the last piece of their remaining bread. Her breath trembled. "May I sit?" she asked gently. The girl looked up, startled, then nodded. Claire placed the piece of bread in her hand. "I don't know what you're going through," she whispered, "but this helped me when I was scared." The teenager stared at the bread, confused, then broke into tears, loud, exhausted tears that shook her whole body. Claire held her, stunned by her own courage. She didn't know why she had done it, but it felt right. That evening, the city's energy grew even stranger. Not chaotic, not supernatural, just unified. The ripple had become a wave. Post after post began circulating online. "Someone left bread at my door." "A stranger paid my bus fare." "I found food on my seat this morning." "A little girl at school said something that gave me hope." "Does anyone feel like something is happening in Leeds?" The comments filled fast. "Yes, yes, I felt it too. Something is happening. I can't explain it, but I'm not as angry today. I helped someone for the first time in months. I cried in public and someone held my hand. Who started this? Does anyone know? No one knew. But the city had begun to ask the right question. Who started it? Amelia walked home beside her mother that evening as the sky darkened again. Children ran past them on bikes. Neighbors waved who hadn't spoken in years. Someone across the street left food on a windowsill deliberately, waiting to see who might need it. People felt watched, not by fear, by compassion. The alley appeared around the corner, quiet, familiar, damp, and yet filled with an atmosphere that neither of them had ever felt before. Amelia stopped in the center of it. Claire paused beside her. "What is it?" she whispered. The girl closed her eyes, breathing slowly. "Mom," she whispered, "the city is looking for the person who asked first." Claire felt her heart freeze. She crouched beside her daughter, gripping her shoulders gently. "Do they know it was you?" Amelia opened her eyes, soft, calm, certain. "No," she said, "but they're about to find out." The alley held its breath. Something vast and quiet was drawing nearer, something that didn't belong to crowds or chaos, something that didn't need thunder or spectacle, something that moved through light and warmth and the simple sound of a child's whisper. Tomorrow the city would learn her name, and nothing in Leeds would ever be the same. Morning did not crash into Leeds that day. It arrived gently, like someone whispering instead of knocking. The sun pushed through thin breaks in the clouds, casting soft, diffused light over the rows of houses, the quiet streets, the slowly filling buses. There was still noise, still rush, still grey, but under it, something hummed with a different tone. The city was awake, and for the first time, it was aware of itself. In the apartment above the alley, Claire's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She had ignored it the first few times. Then the 5th, then the 8th. She stood over the small table with the half-loaf wrapped in cloth, her thumb hovering over the screen, heart tightening with each new notification. Unknown numbers, messages from co-workers, a text from a neighbor she barely spoke to. "Have you seen this? Is this your daughter? Please look at the link." She finally opened one. The screen lit up with a familiar sentence. A little girl shared her bread with me and said, "I have enough for today." I don't know who she is, but something about the way she said it changed me. Underneath, there were pictures, not of Amelia, not of her face, only small pieces, a blurred shot of a child's hand placing a piece of bread on a lunch tray, a quick photo taken from behind as a girl in a faded coat walked through the school courtyard, a notebook page with the words, "The day God sent bread." Someone had captured it from a distance, the letters slightly shaky, but readable. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, people tagging each other. "This is in Leeds. My cousin saw her at school. I think she's from the neighborhood near the old bakery. Someone said her name is Amélia." Claire's lungs forgot how to work. She sank into the nearest chair, pressing a hand to her mouth. Her chest felt squeezed from the inside, halfway between terror and awe. In the doorway, Amelia appeared, hair still unbrushed, eyes soft with sleep. She watched her mother silently, sensing before knowing. "What is it?" she asked gently. Claire turned the screen toward her. Her own daughter's story looked back at them, not just the bus stop, not just the bread, but the echoes that had moved through the city. People writing about finding food at their doors, people talking about feeling pushed to help someone, people confessing they had not believed in anything good for years until now. No miracles, no lightning, no spectacle, just bread, just kindness. Just a thread that had woven itself from house to house, hand to hand, heart to heart, and now they wanted to know, who started it? "Your name is in the comments," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "They're trying to find you, love." Amelia's face didn't change much. There was no panic, no excitement, just a quiet understanding settling over her features like a familiar coat. "They're not looking for me," she said softly. "They're looking for what happened to them." At school, the air felt strange before they even arrived. Parents stood in small groups outside the entrance, talking in low tones. Some pointed at their phones, some wiped their eyes discreetly, some just stared, lost in thought. Inside, teachers were gathered in the staff room, the head teacher holding her phone as she replayed the same video over and over, a shaky recording of a little girl placing bread next to another child and saying, "I have enough for today." Her face never appeared, only her hands, only her voice, but for those who knew her, it was enough. "That's her," whispered Mrs. Collins, the teacher who had cried by the fence the day before. Her voice shook. "That's Amelia." "Are you sure?" the head teacher asked. Mrs. Collins nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sure." A decision hung in the room, heavy and fragile. Do we protect her? Do we hide? Do we speak? The world outside was loud, full of opinions, comments, demands. But this story was quiet. It had grown from a whisper, not a shout. The head teacher took a slow breath. "We'll call her Mother," she said, "and we will ask Amelia what she wants. We owe her that much." When Claire arrived at the school office, her hands were trembling. The half-loaf from that morning was still in her bag, as if she couldn't bear to leave it alone in the flat. She stood at the threshold of the office door like someone about to walk into a courtroom. The head teacher greeted her with a softness that disarmed her instantly. "Please, come in," she said. "We're not here to frighten you." Claire sat down. She was shown the post, the shares, the comments. "We didn't seek this attention," the head teacher assured her. "But the city is watching. People are being changed by this. They're saying things online like, I don't know who this girl is, but she made me believe in goodness again." Claire's throat tightened. "And?" she managed. "And," the head teacher continued gently, "some are saying the girl's name is Amelia, your daughter." The room went very quiet. Claire could have denied it. She could have protected their anonymity. She could have insisted it was someone else. Instead, she wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, "Yes, it's her." Mrs. Collins looked down, her voice trembling. "Your daughter asked God for bread," she said softly, and somehow the whole city felt it. Claire broke then, not into panic, not into fear, but into something deeper. A sob that had been waiting for release, sitting in her chest for years, finally found its way out. "I didn't teach her to pray," she said between tears. "I stopped a long time ago. I thought I had nothing left to say to him." The room held its breath. "And yet," the head teacher whispered, "he listened to her." They called Amelia in. She walked into the office with the same small, steady steps she took everywhere. No rush, no fear. When she saw her mother crying, she went straight to her and took her hand. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly. "No, love," Claire said, shaking her head, pulling her close. "You did something I don't have words for." The head teacher knelt to meet the girl's eyes. "People in Leeds are talking about you," she said gently. "They don't know your face. They only know a piece of your story. They want to thank you. They want to know how this started, all this bread, all this kindness." Amelia blinked slowly. "They think I did it?" she asked. "Didn't you?" Mrs. Collins whispered. Amelia thought for a long moment. Then quietly she shook her head. "I asked," she said, "but I didn't move their hearts. I just opened mine." The adults in the room felt those words sink into places inside them they thought had long turned to stone. "Well, what do you want us to do?" the head teacher asked softly. "If people ask, if reporters call, if the city says, 'Who began this?' do you want us to say your name?" Amelia looked at her mother. Claire's eyes were red, her lips trembling, but there was something new in her gaze now, something like surrender, something like trust. "It's your choice, love," she whispered. "No one can take it from you." Amelia turned back to the head teacher and smiled faintly. "If they ask," she said, "tell them there was a girl who asked God for bread, and he gave it to more people than she ever imagined." The head teacher frowned gently. "But your name?" The girl's smile deepened, soft, almost playful. "If they really need a name," she whispered, "tell them it was all of them." Silence blanketed the room, sacred, heavy, beautiful, because deep down they all knew she was right. That afternoon, a small local article appeared online. No photograph of her face. No address, no school name, only a simple headline, "The humble girl who asked God for bread and touched a city." The story described a child whose private prayer in a forgotten alley had somehow awakened kindness in countless strangers. It did not try to explain it. It did not dress it up as magic. It did not turn it into spectacle. It simply told of a girl who asked, and a city that answered. The article ended with a single line. "She does not want to be famous. She only wants everyone to remember that they can hear the same whisper she heard if they soften their hearts enough to listen." People read it on buses, in offices, in kitchens, in hospital waiting rooms. Some smiled, some cried, some scoffed. But many, more than anyone expected, put down their phones, stood up, and did something kind for someone. Not because they felt pressured, not because it was a trend, because something inside them had been quietly touched. That night, the alley behind the apartment was not empty. Someone had left a basket near the wall, no note, no name, filled with bread from different places. Crusty loaves, soft rolls, wrapped slices, Some clearly homemade, others from shops, all brought by different hands. Claire and Amelia stood together at the edge of the alley, looking at it. "What is this?" Claire whispered. "A table," Amelia said softly, "for whoever needs it next." They did not take any that night. They didn't need to. Instead, they watched from the window as one by one people found it. A man with tired eyes, a teenager walking home alone, a woman pushing a stroller, an old man with shaking hands. They took only what they needed. No one emptied the basket. No one fought. No one took more for later. As if somehow the city had learned to trust. There will be enough for today. Inside, Amelia sat at the table, opened her notebook, and turned to a fresh page. She wrote in small, careful letters, "The day the city listened." Claire watched her, heart full and trembling. "Do you think this will stop?" she asked softly. "One day, when people forget?" Amelia rested the pen, thinking. "Maybe," she said. "People forget easily." She looked up, eyes deep and gentle. "But the alley remembers, and he doesn't forget." Her words hung softly in the air like a final chord. Leads continued to move. Buses rolled, shops closed and opened, arguments still happened. Pain still existed, but somewhere inside that living, breathing city, a new layer had been added, thin, invisible, but real. A memory, a story, a whisper carried on the wind. A humble girl had cried out to God for bread. And the answer had not been just for her. It had spilled over, broken open, passed from hand to hand, until a whole city felt its warmth. Now the question did not belong to her anymore. It belonged to everyone who heard this story. If a child's whispered prayer could touch an entire city, what would your heart hear if you dared to ask? Would you recognize the answer, or would you turn your eyes away?